Let's get into the economic collapse financial news. Now, we've been looking at the entire economy and each sector on how each one is contracting, and we've been watching this for a very long time. And as we move forward throughout this year and as we keep going, we can see that contraction continually happens. It's not slowing down, things aren't reversing, and all of a sudden everything is getting better. And we can see that retail sales, they are continually contracting. I mean, we've been noting that there are many stores that are closing, many going into bankruptcy. And the corporate media is out there trying to convince us that online sales, that is the reason for most of what we're seeing today, is that the brick and mortar stores, well, no one's going out to shop. They're doing everything online. And we knew for a very long time this was a complete lie. So what we are seeing is that the corporate media is trying to explain away why this is happening. Now, coming out of Visual Capitalist, Jeff Desjardins, he notes back in 2000, less than 1% of retail sales came from the e-commerce sector. However, online sales, well, as we know, they have climbed each and every year since then, even though the Great Recession had occurred. Now, in 2009, e-commerce made up around 4% of total retail sales. And today, which is the latest number, it is made up of 8.3% of total retail sales. So when the corporate media is out there giving us figures like, oh, $3 billion in online sales, it's doing fantastic, it's taking over from brick and mortar, we can see that's completely fake, phony, and false once again. Now, we are seeing a huge number of bankruptcies right now. We're not even 1/3 through 2017, and we already have about as many retail bankruptcies as the previous year's total. Now, if they continue at the current pace, we could see over 50 retailers bankrupt by the end of this year. And we know with the store closing, so far we've seen around 3,000 store closing announced in 2017. And like we said before, Credit Suisse, they projected this out, and they're looking at anywhere between 7,000 to 8,600 stores being closed by the end of this year. And we can see that there's a lot of stores that are closing. And some of them limited, Wet Seal, Eastern Outfitters, BCBG, H.H. Gregg. These are also stores that declared bankruptcy, Payless. And we can see when you go throughout the mall, you can see that these stores are completely going out of business. And what this tells us is that the American person, they do not have extra funds to go out and spend. No, they are not spending this online whatsoever because that's only 8.3% of total retail sales. What it really means, and it's not the weather, it has nothing to do with what's going on in the universe, it is because people just don't have the funds to go out shopping. And we've been saying this for a very long time. And when we look at the actual facts and the data and the actual numbers, we do have proof that this is why this is happening. So then we have to think to ourselves, if retail sales are continually declining, and we know that it's not because of online sales of why brick and mortar stores are declining, we have to think, well, is the unemployment numbers, are these real? I mean, they're telling us they're down to 4.4%. We're at full employment right now. And since everyone has a job, why aren't they going out to retail to spend this money? Well, we know, because we've been looking at all the numbers, that this is not true. But the Fed is using the unemployment numbers right now to say, yes, we are going to raise interest rates. Now, remember, we just had our GDP numbers at 0.7%. Now, most likely they're going to manipulate these GDP numbers coming up in the next round, the second quarter, to convince everyone that, yes, it is now time to raise interest rates. I think they're going to raise them before those numbers even come out. They're going to show the estimate numbers saying, oh, it's around 2%, 1%, we're at full employment, let's raise interest rates. We already get word from John Williams, who's the San Francisco Fed president, and he stands by his outlook saying, listen, we are still going to do 3 to 4 hikes this year. We are beyond full employment right now. And the economy is operating above its potential right now. That's how great the economy is. So there is absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be raising the rates in June. Now, think about what they're saying right now. They're looking at the manipulated unemployment numbers, trying to convince us that everything is fine in this economy, even though there's a projective of 8,600 stores that are going to be closed this year. 3,500 have already closed. We're going to hit around 50 bankruptcies. And all these individuals are losing their jobs. But again, it's manipulated. They're not counted in the unemployment numbers. And we know why they're doing this, because they realize that they cannot support the system the way it is right now. Now, how do we know this? Well, 2 weeks ago, Bank of America caused a little bit of a stir, but the corporate media really didn't publish this because it really wasn't news. And what they did is they calculated that the central banks, mostly the ECB, Bank of Japan, and we know the Fed, well, they control most of this, where they're feeding them a lot of this free money. They've bought about $1 trillion of financial assets just in the first 4 months of 2017, which amounts to $3.6 trillion annualized. This is the largest central bank buying on record. What are they purchasing? They're purchasing stocks. Now, Bank of America's Michael Hartnett noted that the supersized central bank intervention, which he dubbed liquidity supernova, is the best explanation why global stocks and bonds, both annualizing double-digit gains year to date, and this really has nothing to do with Trump, Le Pen, China. It's the central banks that are propping the stock market up. Now, if we go back in time, back to October 2014, Citibank's Matt King calculated that it costs the central banks $200 billion per quarter to avoid a market crash, or as he put it, it takes around $200 billion per quarter just to keep markets from selling off. Now, the Swiss National Bank, well, they purchased a record $17 billion in U.S. equities in just the first quarter, bringing the total U.S. equity long holdings to an all-time high above $80 billion, in the process of soaking up nearly 4 million Apple shares in the first 3 months of this year. And when we look at this, we can see that on the surface, these sums appear vast. However, in the latest weekly report by Deutsche Bank credit strategist Dominic Konstam, well, he finds that something is even more troubling than what we've been talking about. $1 trillion in central bank liquidity year to date, or roughly $250 billion per month, is not enough. The reason is twofold. On one hand, there is the stock of existing central bank assets that keep growing at an exponential pace, which implies that the central banks have to monetize even more assets just to keep the system from becoming unstable or collapsing. So what does this mean for the central bank? It's either they have to up their game, which is going to be very difficult, because what's going to happen in the stock market, which we're seeing right now, is that insiders are getting out. Retail investors are coming into the market, and there's a reason for this, because the central banks realize and understand that they're pumping so much into the market right now that they can't keep this up anymore because it won't matter. And when stocks realize just how insufficient the record $1 trillion in central bank liquidity has become, central banks, which have stepped into every single market correction over the past 7 years with some liquidity supernova, will, for the first time since the financial crisis, be out of tools completely, something that Janet Yellen and the rest know. This is why they need to raise the interest rates. This is why they need to collapse the economy, because they understand and they realize that they brought the system to the point where they can't push it any longer. And they don't want the crash to come from a black swan type of an event. They want to cause it because they want to control the narrative. And this is what we see playing out right now. They're in the process of collapsing this system. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe. Let's get into the economic collapse, political and geopolitical news. Now, as we know, the Republicans, they pushed their health care plan through the House. They still have to push it through the Senate. And right now, they're saying, you know something? Let the Senate take their time because we want to do this right. Well, when we look at this health care bill, we know this is not right for the people. And the only way we'll really know that it's right for the people is if the entire government takes on this plan and they drop their health insurance. And I'm talking about the House, the Senate, the President, the Vice President, you name it. They need to drop what they have and take on this new health insurance. They didn't do it with Obamacare because they knew that, hey, I don't want this. But we can see there might be a strategy here. I don't know if the Republican health care plan is going to make it through the Senate. The Senate saying that we're going to create our own health care plan, but this is not how it really works. But they're so desperate to stop this that they don't want this to move forward here. And I think one of the reasons why they're saying, hey, take your time with it, let's do it right, is because they know that Obamacare is dying right now. This might be part of their strategy, because what we're seeing is that even in Iowa, in Maryland, there are a lot of insurance companies that are backing out of the system. We see out in Maryland, premiums are about to skyrocket. Maryland residents are looking at higher premiums right now. And the largest insurer, CareFirst Blue Cross Blue Shield, is requesting a 50% year-on-year premium increase. Now, the new rates would mean that a 40-year-old non-smoker in the Baltimore area would face premiums ranging from $359 a month to $715 before receiving any federal subsidies. Now, CareFirst said the rate increase are necessary because the company has lost $600 million serving Obamacare exchanges since the company first started selling plans in the marketplace 4 years ago. Now, remember how they designed Obamacare. The reason why there's a penalty is because when the insurance companies initially wrote this deal, this bill, they wanted to make sure that everyone was going to be in on their system. They needed a gigantic base of individuals buying their insurance. And the only way to force everyone into the system is to penalize people, where they said, oh, people don't want to get they don't want to be penalized, so they will opt in for health insurance because they rather have coverage. And what happened is that people said, you know something, I can't afford this coverage, because again, they weren't understanding what was going on in the United States, where the economy was failing. And people decided to take the penalty because it was a lot cheaper. And as more and more people decided to opt out of the healthcare industry, well, this hurt the insurance companies. And they weren't able to make the profit they wanted to make, because they thought they were going to have the entire country in on this health insurance. And they started to lose money. So they had to raise premiums. And it got worse and worse as time went on, because what happened was the system was never designed to really help the people. It was designed to make the insurance companies very, very wealthy, because most of the plans had huge deductibles where the insurance companies wouldn't even have to pay out. And the government paid subsidies on the poor. So there were no benefits really to the everyday person. Yes, a small group got some benefits, while the rest of the nation, they were struggling. And about 8 million or so plus people decided to opt out, and that number is continually rising. And again, so far, I've seen nothing from the Republicans, nothing from the Democrats, nothing from government to say, hey, here is something that will benefit the people, because what they're giving us is pure junk. Now we see Trump's second nominee for Army Secretary. He decided to back out. This is Mark Green, and he was all for the Second Amendment. He decided that he's not going to go for this, so we'll have to wait to see who the other nominee is going to be. And we can see right now something must have occurred, because this is the second individual who didn't want to join on. Now, either he was blackmailed, something happened, but this is very curious on how these individuals are continually backing out of this. Now, virtually unnoticed by the majority of corporate media on Wednesday, in a hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee on the FBI's oversight of the investigation of Hillary Clinton's emails, Director James Comey revealed a murky effort as outlined in an undisclosed document by Attorney General Loretta Lynch or her associates to ensure that former presidential candidate would not be charged, and that's Hillary Clinton. And this document apparently reveals the thwarting by Lynch and associates of any effort to hold Clinton accountable. Now, Lynch intended to undertake a major effort to ensure Hillary Clinton would survive the crucial probe. The document, which has been described as both a memo and an email, was written by a Democratic operative who expressed confidence that Ms. Lynch would keep the Clinton investigation from going too far, according to several former officials familiar with the document. And we've known this, that the Department of Justice at that time, Obama, the FBI, they were really doing absolutely nothing, even though WikiLeaks was pouring out all the emails showing that there was an unsecured server, it was wiped clean, and the Department of Justice didn't want to look into it at all. They weren't even curious of why this was happening. I mean, the whole thing sounded like a cover-up from the beginning. It still sounds like a cover-up, and now information is continually coming out, and we'll have to watch this to see how this turns out, because will they do anything? We'll have to wait and see. Now, with the election in France, we see Macron and Le Pen. They are now in the midst of the election, and there are exit polls, and right now the exit polls are saying that Macron has the lead. Now, again, we don't know if this is true. This is coming out of the corporate media, and sometimes what they do is they try to convince people that this candidate is in the lead, so more people go out and say, well, since that person's in the lead, let me vote for this person anyhow. They're going to win, and that will be that. But this election has seen a very low turnout right now of people coming out and voting, and we can see right now, I don't know if it's because the country is under state of emergency. Maybe it's because the Islamic State threatened to blow up polling stations, and I think the central bankers, the deep state, they wanted it this way. This way people wouldn't come out and vote for Le Pen, because they knew they couldn't manipulate the electronic voting systems, so they had to figure out another way. Now, one way is to count the votes in the back room where no one sees it, or try to keep people away from the polls and only bring those in that will vote for Macron. But we can see this is very close right now. This doesn't mean that Macron has won, and we'll have to wait to see how this turns out. We know that the deep state, they are pushing their agenda to get Macron into office. They want their man in there. Now, former president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, he dropped a huge bombshell claiming that the U.S. created the Islamic State. Karzai says he holds the U.S. directly responsible for the funding and orchestration of terrorist events by the Islamic State, and claims that the Pentagon does this in order to further its Middle East agenda. Now, this is not really a surprise to all of us, that where we've been following this all along, and we know the United States government, the central bankers, the coalition forces, they support the terrorist groups, not just the Islamic State, but Al-Qaeda, Al-Sham, Boko Haram, and they use these terrorist groups to get their way, to push their agenda in each one of these countries. Now, his claims come just weeks after the Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard dropped a similar truth bomb, because she visited Syria, she spoke to the people there, and the people were explaining to her what was really going on. Now, there's more coming, pushing the idea that has also said that the CIA is planning to assassinate him, maybe have some type of chemical weapon inside of his country. We also see coming out that North Korea has arrested the fourth American. Now, Kim Jong-un is coming from this area, and about this whatsoever I could find right now, and they're continuing, and the corporate media is pushing it out there. And one thing that I find very interesting, first of all, the Trump administration says they're aware of this, push their agenda out in North Korea, and it's just very interesting that Kim Jong-un would start arresting all these individuals at this point, where the United States, China, Russia, Japan, and the rest of the surrounding countries are like this. It makes no sense, because with the Islamic State, killing journalists, and they videos, they turns out to be fake, phony, and false. And the Islamic State was out there telling everyone, come and bomb us. Bring it. We're taking over Syria. Now we have the corporate media trying to tell us that North Korea is threatening the United States, threatening the same USS George H.W. Bush. This is a aircraft carrier of Iran. And Iran is sending out drones to States. U.S. officials have repeatedly made a big deal about Iran having off their own, saying, don't you think a better question is, why is the U.S. warship 500 miles away from their own territorial waters and constantly looming around one of their ships right off the coast of California, New York, or Florida, and they were just sitting there? How would the United States respond to this? Well, we know how they would respond. Now, out in Syria, we see that Russia, Syria, Iran, Turkey, they've set up these safe zones, and residents in these areas are saying that the safe zones or the de-escalation zones, they are a good thing. One resident, Nasar Ahmad, said, we hope it will be a good omen to prevent the bloodshed of people. The government used to take care of everyone. The reconciliations are good for the situation we live in this country. Other residents, Ali Muhammad, expressed doubt about the rebels respecting the deal. I don't trust the terrorists whatsoever, for we saw nothing from them but deceit. Nevertheless, we are optimistic. Another resident said, and this is Mona Khalil, had similar opinions. The terrorists will not comply with the resolution, but we see the de-escalation zones. They are a good thing. And it looks like Russia, Iran, Syria, they're going to have to protect these areas, because we can see right now that one thing, the Syrian zones, and we can see that the deep state, they don't want a safe zone de-escalation. Going Al Jazeera's attack in the settlements reported citing local residents that representatives from special video brigades made stage videos of consequences of an alleged chemical attack in Syria. Now, according to information from a number of sources among local residents, strikes including the use of poisonous substances. Now, the center added that some of the consultants of the brigades were recognized by the locals as cameramen shooting news in the region for Al Jazeera. Now, Al Jazeera, they have denied these allegations completely. And this is not the first time that such reports were out there, because there was another one on May 2nd saying that Mayadeen broadcasters reported, citing local news sources and eyewitnesses, that a group of White Helmets activists accompanied by one of Arab satellite channels arrived in the area near Idlib in Syria to shoot stage videos alleging depicting consequences of a chemical attack. So something is happening here, and it looks like they're doing different filming in different areas to show that chemical weapons are being used. Now, we know that there could be a plan. There are reports that there's something going to happen very soon. And we can see that by these de-escalation zones that Russia and most likely they are probably setting up something really big right now, zones, because as these de-escalation zones most likely get larger and larger and encompass more of the country, this is going to be a huge problem for the deep state, because what's happening is that they're trying to separate the terrorists from the moderate rebels, the opposition group, and they're telling everyone that, listen, the terrorist groups, they will be destroyed if they try anything in these areas. And Russia, Iran, Syria, they are protecting these areas. And one last push, because if they don't make this push, the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, the whole thing, well, it's done for. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe.